day 59. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. The federal investigation has officially shifted from the primary residence to a vacant neighboring property and a specific vehicle of interest. For weeks, law enforcement treated the Guthrie home as the absolute perimeter of the crime scene. Analysts evaluated internal security systems and scrutinized the immediate physical footprint left behind. Forensic teams now possess operational data indicating the initial perimeter was miscalculated by several hundred feet. The perpetrator did not merely approach the house on the night of the abduction. The latest tactical movements by the FBI suggest a prolonged surveillance operation occurred prior to the breach. The focal point of this operation is reportedly a vacant property located just doors down. This structural vantage point changes the fundamental classification of the suspect profile entirely. The investigation is no longer analyzing a spontaneous intrusion or a random crime of opportunity. Analysts are tracking a calculated extraction executed by someone who meticulously mapped the target environment. The central question defining this active manhunt is a matter of logistical planning and execution. How long was the suspect utilizing the vacant house to monitor the daily routine of Nancy Guthrie? Furthermore, investigators must determine what specific vehicle was used to finally remove her from the grid. The objective today is to analyze this new operational data regarding the vacant property. As law enforcement tracks down this vehicle, the physical evidence continues to evolve. Subscribe to Evidence with John to stay updated on the forensic breakdown the moment this case breaks. This analysis will dissect the physical evidence and the digital timeline to understand the suspect methodology. The shift in focus toward the vacant property requires a rigid reevaluation of all known variables. Surveillance requires immense patience and an uninterrupted line of sight to the target location. The physical proximity of the empty house provided an optimal staging ground for the perpetrator. Investigators are currently attempting to quantify the exact duration of this pre-attack surveillance phase. Identifying the vehicle connected to the vacant lot will theoretically expose the planned escape route. The logistics of moving an incapacitated 84-year-old victim mandate a highly reliable and inconspicuous transport mechanism. Finding that specific vehicle is the primary directive for the federal agents assigned to the active case. The transition from an internal investigation to an external manhunt alters the forensic strategy completely. Law enforcement is pulling network logs and neighborhood camera data targeting the vacant structure. Every vehicle passing that empty house in the weeks prior is now an actionable data point. The suspect required a transport method capable of blending into the residential traffic patterns undetected. A specific vehicle of interest has emerged from this secondary data collection phase. The physical dimensions of the vehicle must accommodate the rapid loading of an uncooperative adult. Analyzing these spatial requirements limits the potential classifications of the suspect vehicle significantly. Federal agents are cross-referencing registration records with proximity data collected from the immediate neighborhood grid. The existence of this vehicle bridges the logistical gap between remote surveillance and the physical abduction. Understanding how the suspect operated from the empty house clarifies the precise execution of the crime. The suspect required a comprehensive understanding of the neighborhood patrol schedules and local lighting conditions. Operating from a stationary position inside the vacant house provided the necessary environmental intelligence. The timeline of events on the night of the abduction heavily supports the theory of advanced planning. To contextualize the vacant house theory, the established chronology of the abduction requires immediate review. The timeline provides a rigid structure of the events that transpired over a precise 41-minute window. On January 31st, Tommaso Cioni drove his mother-in-law back to her residence after dinner. He was the last confirmed individual to visually verify her presence at 9:48 in the evening. Surveillance data confirms the garage door of the home closed securely at exactly 9:50. Nancy Guthrie was inside the house and presumably preparing for her standard evening routine. The sequence of abnormal events commenced the following morning on February 1st. At exactly 1:47 in the morning, the external ring camera was systematically disabled. The suspect approached the property and neutralized the primary visual deterrent without triggering residential alarms. 41 minutes later, the timeline presents the most critical piece of digital evidence currently available. At 2:28 in the morning, the application monitoring her pacemaker disconnected from her cellular device. Nancy Guthrie was taken from the premises wearing only pajamas and without any protective footwear. She was removed without her vital daily medication or her Apple Watch. Law enforcement arrived at 12:15 that afternoon and confirmed the alarming circumstances of her disappearance. First responders secured the perimeter and immediately noted the absence of forced entry at the primary access points. The 41 minutes between the camera failing and the pacemaker disconnecting dictate the parameters of the entire investigation. This tight window of operational silence confirms the absolute necessity of a highly coordinated extraction plan. The precision required to bypass residential security protocols indicates a high level of technical proficiency. A spontaneous intruder would inevitably trigger secondary alarms or leave a massive physical disturbance behind. The clinical efficiency demonstrated during this 41-minute gap strongly corroborates the vacant house surveillance theory. The perpetrator understood the interior layout and executed the physical extraction within a highly specific time frame. The data necessitates peeling back the layers of this covert operation to understand the staging process. The spatial mapping of the neighborhood reveals the critical advantage of the vacant property. An unoccupied structure provides a secure vantage point devoid of unpredictable variables. Tactical analysts define this as a stationary observation post. Operating from within the abandoned house eliminated the risk of vehicular detection by roving police patrols. The suspect achieved total visual dominance over the primary target location without exposing their physical position. According to recent intelligence, this specific property allegedly served as the primary staging ground for the abduction. Utilizing an empty house requires strict operational discipline to maintain a covert footprint. The perpetrator had to manage light pollution and avoid triggering structural utility anomalies. A sudden surge in water or electrical consumption might alert the property owners or municipal monitors. Maintaining a static presence allowed the suspect to catalog the daily rhythms of the Guthrie household. They documented the arrival and departure of family members with absolute precision. The precise timing of the garage door closing at 9:50 was likely logged multiple times. This behavioral data collection is the absolute opposite of a spontaneous crime of opportunity. A disorganized offender attacks randomly based on immediate environmental triggers. This suspect systematically removed unpredictability by studying the target environment over an extended period. The line of sight from the empty house directly dictated the execution strategy. Investigators must analyze the exact angles of visibility available from the windows of the vacant structure. This spatial data will confirm exactly which exterior zones the suspect could actively monitor. They mapped the blind spots of the residential security grid from this elevated or obscured position. Understanding the perimeter defenses allowed the perpetrator to plot an optimal approach vector. The initial breach was not a guess, but a calculated maneuver based on weeks of observation. The operational focus now shifts from the interior of the home to this external staging area. Analyzing the physical footprint left inside the vacant structure is currently a high priority for federal agents. Forensic teams are likely processing the location for biological trace evidence or discarded surveillance equipment. The suspect may have left behind logistical materials used to sustain their prolonged observation phase. Food wrappers or fluid containers would provide an invaluable source of targeted cellular profiling. The transition from observation to action required crossing the physical distance between the two structures. The suspect utilized their comprehensive environmental intelligence to approach the primary residence completely undetected. Peeling back, this initial layer of the mystery exposes a highly methodical and patient operational profile. The external surveillance phase was executed flawlessly based on the available data. Moving from the exterior vantage point to the interior environment represents a massive escalation in risk. The digital timeline recorded during the physical breach presents a highly disturbing forensic sequence. Traditional security architecture relies entirely on external optical sensors to deter or record unauthorized entry. The perpetrator systematically neutralized the primary visual deterrent at exactly 1:47 in the morning. Disabling the external camera indicates a sophisticated understanding of localized network connectivity and hardware vulnerabilities. Blinding the optical sensors effectively severed the home from external digital monitoring protocols. The suspect assumed the operational environment was completely secure and devoid of further technological surveillance. This assumption fundamentally underestimated the presence of internal biomedical telemetry. The ultimate digital witness in this investigation was not mounted on a wall. The most critical forensic data point was implanted directly inside the victim. The application monitoring her cardiovascular device maintained a continuous diagnostic connection to her cellular phone. This telemetry operates on localized frequency bands, requiring close physical proximity between the hardware components. At 2:28 in the morning, this critical biometric connection was permanently severed. The pacemaker physically moved beyond the transmission radius of the stationary cellular device left behind. This precise digital timestamp confirms the exact moment the victim was removed from the primary residence. Analyzing these digital anomalies requires forensic precision, so ensure you are subscribed to Evidence with John as we continue to process this data. The data logged by internal medical devices creates an immutable timeline of the physical extraction. When external cameras are compromised, the physiological network continues to record spatial movements. The disparity between these two critical timestamps is the focal point of the current forensic analysis. The camera failed at 1:47 and the pacemaker disconnected at 2:28. This creates a 41-minute window of absolute operational silence inside the compromised structure. A highly planned extraction of an incapacitated individual typically requires minimal physical time. The objective of an abduction is rapid removal to minimize the exposure window inside the target zone. Remaining inside the unsecured residence for nearly 3/4 of an hour contradicts the established surveillance methodology. The suspect mapped the external environment flawlessly, but lingered inside the high-risk perimeter for 41 minutes. This extended duration indicates a significant deviation from the theoretical extraction protocol. What logistical complications or physical hurdles detain the suspect inside the home for that specific duration? The external staging was mathematically perfect, but the internal execution was significantly prolonged. Forensic data forces investigators to question every action taken during those 41 minutes of silence. The physical evidence left behind must explain this extended chronological gap. A meticulous surveillance operation contradicts a chaotic physical crime scene. Investigators arriving at the residence immediately encountered severe anomalies at the primary structural thresholds. The exterior perimeter presented biological evidence inconsistent with a stealth extraction. Forensic technicians isolated and documented distinct blood deposits located directly on the front porch area. Standard laboratory protocols expedited the biological processing of this critical material. Analysts confirmed the genetic profile of the recovered fluid matched the 84-year-old victim. The presence of biological material on an exterior surface implies a kinetic physical struggle occurred during the extraction. A highly calculated perpetrator, minimizing their footprint, rarely introduces fluid evidence into the environment. The location of the blood suggests the victim sustained an injury either during the breach or the subsequent exit. This physical trauma fundamentally disrupts the theory of a completely silent and perfectly executed abduction. The structural integrity of the residence offered further forensic contradictions. First responders discovered the rear access door of the property left completely unsecured and wide open. Leaving a primary egress point exposed violates basic operational security for a covert intrusion. An open door alters the internal thermal environment and drastically increases the risk of neighborhood detection. The perpetrator meticulously managed the digital perimeter by neutralizing the external camera network. Failing to physically secure the egress route suggests a sudden breakdown in tactical discipline. This rapid departure is further corroborated by the items abandoned inside the residential footprint. An analysis of the interior environment revealed critical survival assets were completely ignored by the suspect. The cellular device tethered to the medical telemetry remained stationary within the primary living space. The Apple Watch belonging to the victim was equally discarded near the primary digital hub. Leaving these tracking devices behind demonstrates a clear understanding of modern geospatial surveillance capabilities. The suspect actively mitigated the risk of localized digital tracking by isolating the victim from her hardware. However, the perpetrator also abandoned pharmaceutical assets essential for the daily survival of the target. The vital medication required by the elderly victim was left completely untouched on the premises. A prolonged abduction scenario typically requires the suspect to maintain the physiological stability of the captive. Ignoring the pharmaceutical requirements indicates a severely compressed operational timeline or a lack of long-term logistical planning. The physical evidence collected from the scene creates a highly fractured profile of the suspect. The technical sophistication required to blind the camera network aligns with advanced surveillance methodologies. Leaving biological material on the porch aligns with a disorganized and highly reactive physical altercation. The visual data gathered from the vacant house should have mitigated the need for kinetic force. The perpetrator possessed total spatial awareness of the target environment before initiating the breach. They understood the physical limitations of an 84-year-old individual occupying the residence. The deployment of physical violence resulting in fluid loss indicates an unforeseen variable compromised the extraction protocol. Investigators must reconcile the pristine digital manipulation with the chaotic physical remnants left behind. The 41 minutes of internal silence must contain the catalyst for this operational degradation. The suspect entered the perimeter with absolute control over the technological environment. They exited the perimeter, leaving a highly visible forensic trail of open doors and biological markers. This severe juxtaposition demands a rigorous analytical review of the operational parameters. The suspect demonstrated high proficiency in digital evasion, but failed fundamental physical containment. The initial assessment of a perfectly executed abduction requires immediate adjustment based on this material data. The crime scene presents two entirely different suspect profiles operating simultaneously within the same physical space. The data suggests an intersection of extreme premeditation and sudden localized panic. This analytical valley requires a bridging theory to connect the disparate forensic realities. The digital footprint points toward a professional, while the physical footprint points toward an amateur. Unraveling this contradiction is essential for isolating the true methodology of the perpetrator. Analyzing the physical properties of the blood evidence provides further contextual data regarding the extraction timeline. The coagulation rate and environmental degradation of the fluid help establish a tighter chronological window. Forensic teams measure the specific volume and dispersion patterns to reconstruct the mechanics of the injury. A concentrated deposit suggests a stationary bleeding event, while a trail indicates movement during fluid loss. The exact geometry of the blood on the porch directly informs the physical positioning of the victim and the suspect. This localized trauma occurred outside the visual range of the disabled camera system. The suspect successfully removed the optical sensor, but could not control the biological variables of the target. The open rear door provides a secondary vector for environmental analysis. The specific locking mechanism utilized on that threshold dictates the required method of forced entry or manipulation. If the mechanism was bypassed without structural damage, the suspect possessed advanced physical infiltration capabilities. Leaving the door open may have been a calculated decision to facilitate a rapid, unimpeded exit strategy. Alternatively, it represents a severe cognitive failure under the extreme stress of the extraction process. The specific items left behind also require a deeper behavioral analysis. The isolation of the cellular phone and the smartwatch confirms a targeted technological suppression. The suspect prioritized digital darkness over all other operational requirements. The failure to secure the daily medication, however, speaks to the ultimate objective of the intrusion. A financially motivated ransom operation requires the target to remain viable for negotiation. Bypassing the medication suggests the suspect either possessed their own pharmaceutical supply or lacked any intention of long-term preservation. This behavioral indicator drastically alters the threat assessment for the missing individual. The physical scene is a hybrid of calculated suppression and reckless abandonment. The forensic reality is that the suspect spent 41 minutes inside the structure. The extraction should have been seamless given the extensive surveillance conducted from the neighboring property. Instead, the suspect encountered a variable that necessitated physical force and a rushed departure. The biological evidence on the porch is the direct result of this unknown internal complication. The open door is the physical manifestation of an operational timeline collapsing under pressure. The forensic units are currently processing these physical contradictions to build a cohesive behavioral model. The data collected from the porch and the interior living spaces is being integrated into the broader timeline. The investigation must determine if the physical chaos was an intentional misdirection or a genuine tactical failure. The biological material is currently undergoing advanced genetic sequencing to identify any secondary DNA profiles. The presence of foreign genetic material would instantly provide a localized target for the federal manhunt. The physical evidence remains the most reliable anchor point in this highly complex narrative. The suspect controlled the digital narrative but lost control of the physical environment. This loss of control provides the primary forensic wedge required to deconstruct the operation. The forensic contradictions mandate an immediate reassessment of the primary suspect classification. Law enforcement agencies initially categorized the perpetrator based on the highly sophisticated digital suppression tactics. Disabling a proprietary surveillance network without triggering secondary alerts requires specialized technical knowledge. Furthermore, preliminary reports confirm the suspect operated under total physical concealment during the localized approach. The individual allegedly utilized a facial mask and heavy gloves to mitigate any direct biometric transfer. This level of physical and digital discipline points strictly toward a highly trained operative executing a planned objective. The utilization of the vacant property for sustained environmental surveillance perfectly aligns with this professional classification. A trained individual maps the terrain, neutralizes the primary sensors, and controls the physical exposure. However, this professional profile violently collides with the physical reality discovered by first responders. A highly trained operative does not compromise the extraction vector by leaving an egress point wide open. They do not engage in a physical altercation that deposits the biological material of the target on an exterior surface. These specific actions represent severe tactical errors typically associated with a disorganized offender. The investigation is currently trapped between two highly conflicting operational theories. The first theory proposes a botched home invasion executed by an amateur who possessed anomalous technical capabilities. This amateur managed to disable the camera and conceal their identity but panicked during the internal physical execution. The panic resulted in the structural negligence and the physical trauma sustained by the 84-year-old victim. The second theory proposes a professional operative who encountered a catastrophic variable inside the residence. This unforeseen complication derailed the meticulously planned extraction and forced a rapid, chaotic retreat. The 41 minutes of unrecorded internal activity hold the key to resolving this fundamental conflict. The suspect entered as a professional and exited, leaving the physical signature of an amateur. This specific complication is driving the analytical strategy of the federal task force. The behavioral profile is fractured, making it exceedingly difficult to predict the post-offense movements of the suspect. A professional will utilize secure logistics and maintain total digital isolation following the operation. An amateur is highly likely to generate secondary digital footprints or discard evidence improperly. Identifying the correct profile is essential for allocating specialized federal resources and tracking the perpetrator. The current data parameters cannot fully reconcile the digital precision with the physical negligence. To understand how these conflicting theories intersect, we must analyze the logistical requirements of the escape. If you want to track the exact forensic parameters of this federal manhunt, ensure you hit the subscribe button for Evidence with John. We actively monitor the data discrepancies that define these complex investigations. The missing variable in this conflicting behavioral matrix is the method of physical transportation. The suspect managed to remove an incapacitated adult from a densely populated residential sector without raising an immediate physical alarm. The open back door and the biological evidence indicate the extraction was physically demanding and potentially highly visible. Carrying an uncooperative or injured individual across an open neighborhood perimeter is a massive operational risk. The suspect required a localized containment unit to successfully transition from the chaotic residential extraction to a secure transport phase. This transition point is the weakest link in any covert physical operation. The suspect had to load the victim, mitigate any external visual exposure, and depart the localized grid. The level of organization demonstrated during the transport phase will ultimately define the true profile of the perpetrator. If the escape was as chaotic as the physical crime scene, the suspect likely utilized a highly visible or poorly maintained transport method. If the escape was executed flawlessly, the chaotic physical scene may have been a localized anomaly within a broader professional operation. Law enforcement must find the mechanical bridge that connects the residential crime scene to the external network. The Surveillance data collected from the surrounding municipal grid is actively being processed to identify this mechanical variable. The suspect could not physically carry the victim indefinitely, requiring a rapid transition to a motorized platform. This platform must have been positioned within a highly specific radius of the compromised residence. The proximity of the vacant property provides the optimal location for staging this critical logistical asset. The empty house offered a secure zone to park and conceal a transport platform away from standard neighborhood scrutiny. The entire operational profile now hinges on the identification of this specific asset. The transition from the chaotic physical scene to a secure transport phase dictates the immediate direction of the manhunt. The physical contradictions inside the house can only be explained by the logistics utilized outside the house. The investigation has officially reached a critical juncture where physical evidence must intersect with vehicular telemetry. The next data point will completely rewrite the parameters of the suspect profile and the operational timeline. The federal manhunt is currently centralized around one highly specific mechanical asset. Lead detectives are aggressively tracking a singular vehicle directly tied to the vacant property. Alleged reports indicate this transport platform connects the surveillance phase to the physical extraction. The existence of this specific vehicle resolves the paradox of moving an incapacitated elderly target. Transporting a compromised adult requires strict environmental concealment to prevent immediate civilian reporting. Carrying a victim down a residential street mandates rapid and secure vehicular containment. Databases are actively filtering local registration records against the dimensions required for rapid physical loading. The cargo capacity of the target vehicle must conceal the suspect and the captive simultaneously. This physical requirement significantly narrows the search parameters to specific automotive classifications and manufacturing dimensions. We must mathematically analyze the logistical constraints of executing this transport during the critical 41-minute window. I encourage viewers to calculate the operational time required to move a target to a concealed vehicle. Drop your logistical assessments in the comments below as we collectively deconstruct the suspected extraction methodology. Navigating an unconscious adult across variable terrain introduces immense physiological strain on the perpetrator. The vehicle could not simply be parked in the immediate driveway without triggering neighborhood acoustic awareness. It was allegedly staged within the boundaries of the vacant lot to maintain total visual suppression. This staging location required the suspect to traverse the physical distance between the two residential parcels. Moving an individual across property lines at 2 a.m. explains the severe operational degradation. The physical exhaustion of this manual transport likely caused the suspect to abandon the rear egress protocols. Securing the primary residence became secondary to achieving vehicular containment before municipal patrols swept the sector. The blood evidence recovered from the external porch aligns precisely with an extraction sequence encountering physical resistance. A struggle during the loading phase at the vehicle access point would deposit biological material on surrounding surfaces. If the transport platform was staged incorrectly, the distance required for manual carry increases the operational risk exponentially. Detectives are utilizing advanced geospatial mapping to calculate the exact distance to the alleged staging zone. This specific measurement dictates the maximum physical exertion required by the unknown operative during the covert retreat. Identifying the make and model of the vehicle provides a definitive blueprint of the suspect logistics. A commercial cargo van offers maximum concealment but introduces a larger acoustic footprint during neighborhood navigation. A standard passenger sedan provides stealth but severely restricts the physical loading geometry required for an uncooperative target. The federal task force heavily relies on civilian reporting to isolate this mechanical variable within the municipal grid. Locating this specific asset represents the highest priority for the ongoing active investigation into Nancy Guthrie. Once the vehicle is positively identified, forensic technicians can process the interior cabin for transferred biological material. Trace evidence inevitably transfers between a victim and a transport platform during a non-compliant physical extraction scenario. The upholstery and internal storage compartments act as a secondary crime scene, retaining microscopic cellular data indefinitely. This vehicular interior contains the critical answers regarding the physical condition of the victim immediately post-extraction. Analyzing the tire tread impressions left within the immediate vicinity of the vacant lot offers mechanical intelligence. The Specific wear patterns on the rubber provide highly individualized mechanical signatures unique to a single physical asset. Forensic technicians cast these impressions to determine the exact wheelbase and turning radius of the suspected transport platform. This mechanical geometry further refines the predictive models utilized by the Federal Task Force to scan regional traffic archives. If the vehicle utilized a specific suspension modification, the payload distribution would leave a distinct physical signature. Furthermore, the specific fluid deposits potentially left by the vehicle engine offer chemical markers for environmental tracking. A microscopic leak of transmission fluid creates a traceable chemical pathway exiting the immediate residential perimeter. The integration of mechanical evidence with the biological data forms the ultimate analytical matrix for this investigation. The tactical transition from the residential structure to the mobile environment represents the definitive peak of the operation. Everything preceding this exact moment was surveillance, while everything following this precise transition was active geographic evasion. The suspect successfully integrated the target into the mobile platform and seamlessly merged into the local traffic infrastructure. This transition effectively erased the physical footprint of the operation from the immediate localized neighborhood perimeter. Tracking the subsequent movements of the vehicle requires processing municipal traffic cameras and automated license plate readers. The digital dragnet expands outward from the localized residential grid to the regional arterial transportation network. Ensure you subscribe to Evidence with John to receive immediate analytical updates when this vehicular data is declassified. Our channel will meticulously dissect the municipal routing data to reconstruct the exact escape vector utilized by the suspect. Understanding the regional topography provides critical intelligence regarding the ultimate destination of the mechanical transport platform. The suspect navigated the vehicle away from the vacant staging ground, utilizing a highly pre-planned extraction route. This route likely avoided primary arterial roadways to minimize exposure to automated governmental surveillance systems overhead. The perpetrator demonstrated extreme digital awareness by neutralizing the internal residential camera network prior to the physical breach. This technical proficiency strongly suggests they applied similar advanced counter-surveillance tactics during the vehicular navigation phase. Avoiding major intersections equipped with optical sensors requires extensive, localized geographical knowledge of secondary arterial roadways. The investigation must accurately chart the path of least resistance through the suburban environment to predict the trajectory. The vehicle serves as the physical key required to unlock the final geographical destination of the missing individual. The analytical focus must descend from the chaotic extraction event to the cold reality of the ongoing federal manhunt. The current status of the federal investigation remains highly active and geographically dynamic across multiple regional jurisdictions. Law enforcement agencies are officially operating under an ongoing manhunt classification with 0 confirmed suspect apprehensions reported. The primary tactic inclusively focused on identifying and securing the specific vehicle tied to the vacant property. Federal agents are actively canvassing secondary surveillance networks across adjacent municipalities to track the potential extraction route. The operational timeline has surpassed 59 days without a definitive resolution regarding the precise location of the victim. Investigators systematically refuse to publicly speculate on the exact motivations driving this highly coordinated logistical operation. The collected data currently provides a tactical map of the extraction but fails to isolate a primary psychological catalyst. 2 critical operational questions remain completely unanswered as the forensic processing of the staging area continuously progresses. First, investigators must mathematically determine the exact identity of any individuals occupying the vacant property prior to February 1st. Neighborhood reporting indicates potential unverified sightings of transient human activity within the structure before the incident initially occurred. Establishing a rigid timeline of unauthorized occupation is essential to differentiating between random squatters and targeted surveillance operatives. The second heavily unanswered question involves the specific classification of the transport platform utilized during the critical window. Without the exact physical dimensions of the vehicle, the regional search parameters remain mathematically overwhelming for municipal resources. Identifying the specific make and model provides the necessary digital filter to isolate the suspect within broader traffic data. The entire investigation is suspended in a state of forensic anticipation pending the physical recovery of this mechanical asset. The behavioral profile of the suspected operative remains deeply fractured between extreme technical precision and chaotic physical execution. The internal digital footprint suggests a professional, while the exterior biological remnants suggest a panicked amateur losing operational control. This severe internal contradiction prevents behavioral analysts from deploying a definitive predictive model regarding post-offense suspect evasion behavior. Federal resources are currently heavily concentrated on processing the biological material recovered from the primary residential threshold. Advanced genetic sequencing is currently underway to isolate any secondary cellular profiles deposited during the localized physical struggle. The identification of foreign cellular data would immediately transition the investigation from a vehicular search to an interpersonal manhunt. Currently, the alleged vehicle represents the single most viable lead capable of bridging the physical gap between the crime scenes. The vacant house serves as the exact origin point of the threat, while the residential interior serves as the execution zone. The vehicle functions as the dynamic mechanical container that physically links these two otherwise static structural environments. The tactical reality indicates that an elderly woman was systematically removed from a secure environment without triggering immediate alarms. The perpetrator successfully manipulated the physical boundaries and digital perimeters of a suburban neighborhood to execute a targeted extraction. The highly ongoing nature of this case requires the civilian population to immediately maintain a highly vigilant analytical posture, monitoring local neighborhood environments for out-of-place vehicles or unauthorized occupation of vacant structures is a functional operational necessity. The surveillance methods utilized by the suspect demonstrate the extreme physical vulnerability of standard residential security perimeters. Understanding these specific tactical vulnerabilities is the primary defensive mechanism for preventing future localized residential operational breaches. The federal task force continues to actively solicit public intelligence regarding any anomalies detected near the primary surveillance staging ground. Every isolated piece of civilian data is currently being triaged and cross-referenced against the established 41-minute extraction timeline. The complete absence of a definitive operational resolution amplifies the critical importance of continuous data collection and forensic review. The investigation will permanently remain in an active tracking phase until the designated transport platform is finally located and secured. The physical evidence currently available strictly dictates a rigid adherence to logistical analysis over speculative psychological profiling. We must rigorously remain anchored to the verified physical data points surrounding the vacant property and the missing medical telemetry. The unknown suspect remains an unidentified variable currently operating far outside the operational boundaries of the active digital dragnet. The perimeter of a crime scene is no longer physical, it is digital. What this case teaches us about digital forensics completely redefines modern residential threat assessment. The traditional model of home security relies heavily on visible external deterrents like motion sensors and illuminated cameras. These legacy systems are designed to intimidate amateur intruders seeking rapid financial gain through crimes of opportunity. The methodology executed near the Guthrie residence demonstrates how easily advanced operatives bypass external optical sensors completely. When the perpetrator successfully neutralized the ring system at 147, the physical structure became digitally isolated. A false sense of security envelops a residence when the primary visual monitoring network is systematically disabled. The investigation must shift focus away from compromised external hardware and concentrate entirely on internal localized network telemetry. The true forensic footprint of modern abductions is frequently recorded by the passive devices we wear and implant internally. The 41-minute chronological gap was entirely established by the disconnection of a highly specific biomedical cardiovascular device. Pacemakers, smart meters, and even automated climate control systems generate a continuous stream of highly localized operational data. This internal network creates an invisible digital web that tracks physical movement and physiological status with mathematical precision. Advanced investigators now utilize these internal digital logs to reconstruct timelines when the external optical perimeter fails completely. The data recorded by an implanted pacemaker is significantly more reliable than a potentially manipulated external security camera system. This case proves that specialized operatives can manage their physical visibility but cannot easily control localized internal digital environments. The biometric data logged inside the residence ultimately exposed the precise execution window of the suspect extraction plan. Understanding the vulnerabilities of optical systems emphasizes the absolute necessity of layered internal digital security architecture for residential environments. The forensic analysis heavily prioritizes identifying the vehicle connected to the vacant property over analyzing the compromised camera. The mechanical footprint of the vehicle provides a tangible target, while the digital footprint provides the rigid operational timeline. The intersection of these two entirely distinct forensic disciplines defines the current trajectory of the federal manhunt. We will analyze every forensic update as law enforcement tracks this vehicle and processes the biological evidence. Subscribe to Evidence with John to receive immediate technical breakdowns of the data as the federal timeline expands. Your continuous engagement assists the analytical process by expanding the operational awareness of the entire civilian investigative community. This ongoing case strictly forces us to reconsider the safety perimeters we establish around our own vulnerable residential environments. The tactical utilization of a vacant neighboring structure proves that the primary threat can originate just outside your digital network. The central question remains heavily tethered to the physical logistics of the extraction and the subsequent vehicular transport phase. How long did the perpetrator observe the target from the empty house before initiating the final 41-minute operation? The investigation heavily relies on recovering the designated transport platform to finally illuminate the post-extraction geographic evasion route. The vehicle is the ultimate mechanical key required to unlock the final physical destination of the missing individual. The ongoing federal manhunt serves as a clinical reminder that an active threat can perfectly blend into a quiet neighborhood.